Does Cooper Flagg have the highest end outcome of all the draft picks? And how does the schedule unfold for the Utah Jazz? Do they have a chance at getting him? Find out next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, excited as always to be here with you guys. Have the opportunity to fill in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. You guys know me by now, but I'm a lifelong Jazz fan. As a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of the 2023 NBA Draft Combine, as well as the 2024 NBA Combine, Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician for the past 3 seasons. And don't expect all the stats that you're so accustomed to with David Locke to be gone. The geeky numbers will persist. And I'll bring a unique perspective as someone who's watched a ton of these younger players, the Cody Williamses, the Cooper Flaggs, as we're going to talk about today. And I'll give you insight and analysis on those guys. So hope you guys enjoy. Thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first to listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, where today's question is, well, actually, the best way to help us grow is comment anything below. And today's question to help you guys engage is, what do you think the Jazz's record will be in the 2024-2025 season? I'll tell you what I think the record will be at the end of this episode, but I want to hear what you guys think. Today's episode will be brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. All right, in the first segment, I'll go over the Jazz's schedule, which is a little different now due to having hockey in town and how that'll impact the Utah Jazz. The second segment, I'll go over the schedule for the Jazz and how it impacts the over and under projections that are listed on Fanduel for the worst team in the NBA. And I give my 2 cents on if those teams will hit their marks and how it'll compare to the Jazz, and ultimately where the Jazz likely end up picking prior to the lottery, where the ping pong balls truly decide the fate. And in the final segment, I'll make a pitch of while Cooper Flagg is probably still going to be my number one, and it would take a lot to convince me otherwise. I don't think he has the highest ceiling of anyone in this draft, and I'll tell you who might and who they compare to. And they're Hall of Fame level players. So I don't guarantee a Hall of Fame career, but what I do guarantee is this year's draft is the real deal. So let's dive right in. So the NBA schedules came out, and that's always fun for fans to see what games come to town, what parts of the year matter the most. Does your favorite team have a favorable beginning or end of the season to get off to a hot start or a hot finish entering the playoffs? Are there any brutal patches of playing top teams on the road back-to-back? How many back-to-backs do you have? What's the amount of days you have in between, the longest break between one game to another, all that stuff, long road trips? I like looking at all of it. You guys like looking at all of it. All of that I care about usually, but this year there was one confounding variable that I'd never experienced as a Jazz fan before, and nor have you guys. There's a hockey team in Utah, which creates a different schedule in terms of how long homestands and road stands are because they share the arena and play their seasons throughout the same time frame. That's the Jazz, of course, and the Utah Hockey Club, which will be named later. The Jazz, I'll just tell you the first thing that jumps out to me. The Jazz play 6 straight Western Conference opponents right off the jump, beginning with 2 in a row versus hungry teams looking to make leaps in the Grizzlies and the Warriors at home on the 23rd of October and the 25th of October. Fun games to start the year. I'm hoping to be there. Hopefully you guys are there. That's awesome. And, that's great. There's 6 games in a row that are against teams you're familiar with and probably are going to be hard games to win because the West is really good. That jumps out because the West was really good last year and only figures to be better this year despite a pick like Flagg looming, which would sometimes incentivize teams to be bad. I think 13 teams are going to be really solid. Last year, you saw a team, the Warriors and the Lakers and other teams that factored into the play-in conversation, win 46 games and not make it. The Kings were solid, didn't make it. That brings me to the hockey part of things. Well, actually, not yet. I have one more thing before that. Despite Flagg looming, I think there's going to be a lot of really good teams. So the Jazz, by my estimations, who start the year off playing a lot of Western Conference ones. I talked about the first 6 games right off the jump being against hungry teams in the West right at the beginning. They play 4 more against Western Conference teams that, aside from the Spurs, I think will be in the playoffs. The Jazz, by my estimations, will be favored only 2 times until December, both against Wembanyama and the Spurs, both times at home. You count those games up, it's about 21 games. That brings me to the hockey part of things. The Jazz will not have a regular season, non-part of this in-season tournament games. So the regular season, not counting the one, I think one, could be two in-season regular tournament game, or sorry, in-season tournament games to play into the playoff of that from December 1st to December 28th. All the games that are not in the in-season tournament that happen between the 1st and the 28th will be on the road. And then there'll be one, I believe one game that'll be played at the Delta Center with a funky court on where the Jazz will be playing for the in-season tournament. That's the difference of having a hockey team. The usual December road trip right before Christmas that the Jazz have always had, that we're all accustomed to, it's usually 5 games packed into 8 nights, and it's grueling. But now this is a full month business trip because the Delta Center will be occupied by a team hosting games in the same time period. The converse of that, of course, is they're at home for an 8-game homestand, the longest I can remember in terms of games played, although not as long as duration of coverage as the road stand. But they're playing 8 straight games at home from February 21st to March 3rd. This will mean weariness on the road will factor in earlier in the season as these trips are draining, and I anticipate that means more rookie minutes sooner in the season than previous years, even though without that change in the schedule, I'd assume more rookie minutes anyway for all rookies, not just the leader in the clubhouse. Like we saw Keontae George play from day one, but we didn't see it for Hendricks. We didn't see it from Rogbaji. We did see it for Kessler. I expect there's going to be more for everyone, and it's not going to be as long of G League stints. I think they're going to travel with the team and actually get some participation in that grueling road stretch. I mean, there's 21 games. I'm reiterating this because it's pretty hard to believe, but it's actually true. I'm going to go through the entire thing pretty quickly, so bear with me. Memphis, Golden State, Dallas, Sacramento, San Antonio. That's the first 5 right there, 4 of which are at home. So the Jazz, I think of those 5, probably only favored against San Antonio. The Spurs, as we'll discuss later, are favored, would be favored in terms of games won. They're projected 7 more wins than the Jazz in the season. But, okay, so the Jazz, I don't know what they end up there, but the projections, I would say, are 1-4. Then they head at Denver, at Chicago, at Milwaukee, at San Antonio. I don't think they're favored in any of those 4. So that's 1 out of 9. Then Phoenix, Dallas at home, neither of which I think the Jazz will be favored in. Could get a win. Delta Center's rocky, tough place to play, rowdy place. So that's 11 games, favored in 1 of them so far. At Sacramento, at Clippers, at Lakers, at San Antonio. Probably not favored in any of those. That's 15 games. Home against New York, home against San Antonio. Well, maybe you're favored against San Antonio again, but you're not against the Knicks. They're projected 54 wins. Home against Denver, home against Dallas, home against the Lakers. Some of the biggest stars in basketball right there you're playing. Jokic, Doncic, LeBron, Anthony Davis. You're playing great players. Maybe they'll play. They haven't in years past, but if they play, the Jazz wouldn't be favored in those. That's 18 games in. Maybe even more. Then you play at Oklahoma City, at Portland. Oklahoma City is the first of that long road trip. So that's about 20 games right there. And I think pretty obviously the Jazz are underdogs in at least 16, probably 18 of those games. Then you go into the road trip. The next one's against Portland. That could be a pick 'em, even though it's at Portland. Then you play some bad teams in that road trip at Detroit, at Brooklyn, at Portland again. Like that's pretty hard because you're traveling from Cleveland to Portland and you're playing on a day's rest. You're going to Detroit, you're going to Brooklyn on short notice after already being away from your home, away from your bed for 2.5 weeks at that point. So I go through up until the December 3rd, the 21st game of the season. I think the Jazz are projected to win 2 of those games. That's 2-19 by projections. Obviously, the math's not going to be perfect, but that's a grueling stretch. The reason I reiterate that and tell you who the teams are is tell me if I'm wrong on that. I really sincerely believe that's what's going to be what the math tells us. I told you there's going to be some geeky numbers here, but projections are projections. I think the spreads will, in fact, favor the opposing team in 19 of those 21 games. I don't think we're actually going to go 2-19 to start the year. I think that would be pretty hard to do. I don't think I'd actually be that mad if we did do that, but I just think it's hard to do. Well, coming up next, we're going to talk about records, more about the schedule and what to expect, and who else could have their eyes set on the top of the draft. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What are your self-care non-negotiables? Maybe you never skip leg day or therapy day. Well, whatever your schedule is packed with, kids' activities, big work projects, and more, it's easy to let your priorities slip. Even what makes us happy, it's hard to make time for it. But when it gets to the non-negotiables like therapy, then they become even more important. For example, it's helpful to learn positive coping skills and how to set boundaries. It empowers you to be the best version of yourself. And it isn't just to help those who've experienced major trauma like some think. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. You don't need to have had trauma to think about therapy. It's just for bettering yourself. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists for any time for no additional charge. If you don't click, that's so be it. Try someone else, and you may click with them better, and they help you more. Never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. And I also want to tell you guys about Murdoch Hyundai. Excuse me, Murdoch Chevy. Murdoch Chevy, I can't begin to tell you how awesome they are. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. Chevy is as American as it gets. If you think about a truck on a dirt road coming through, powering through all the terrain, the elements, through the rain, having a big lift, dragging something, towing it all, it's a Chevy. All those films you see, it's a Chevy. It's as American as it gets. You can't think of anything better. They're in Utah, located in Woods Cross and Logan. And they have all these lineups of incredible trucks, the Colorado, the Silverado. And you can also see all the SUVs, the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazer, the Equinox, the Trax. But make sure to go to the website and see the latest deals, what's available, and you can see what's in stock. And they keep it really updated. And not only do they have the incredible salesmen, they have the floor lined with all of these great cars and trucks, but they tell you what's available, what the specs are. Everything you need to know about these cars is on the website. It's up to date. And then, of course, the salesmen and the people in charge at Murdoch Chevy are Class A people who will get you taken care of. So make sure to go to either Woods Cross or Logan and get yourself taken care of. And make sure to check the inventory and about those cars that you're interested in on the website. So if you have questions, you know what to ask. They're awesome at Murdoch Chevy. Also, thank you guys for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed or entertained as Locked On NBA. Daily, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, but certainly on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin. So the Jazz were supposed to be in the Wemby sweepstakes a few years ago, and I've been vocal about this. It frustrated me that we weren't by the end of it, but we did not factor really in. Like I said, this year the Jazz were considered to be not a great team, but weren't as weak, and the class wasn't considered to be as strong. It was a weak draft class, so I don't think there was any talk of being in contention for the top pick, though. To be sure, there was talk about maintaining being in the top 10 of the draft to make a pick rather than convey the pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That was surely a priority. But this year, teams are already changing their plans for the future because the class led by Cooper Flagg showing out at USA Basketball training scrimmages against LeBron, against Drew Holiday, hitting the turnaround, chasing down that tip and scoring. He made his impact felt, and it changed the franchise's goals and plans for different teams. I heard from good sources that day where he was training in Las Vegas against the USA basketball team that eventually won the gold medal made people so enamored with Cooper Flagg that they changed their team's plans for the season to come in order to give themselves the best chance to get Cooper Flagg. So without further ado, here are the over-under projections on wins for the Utah Jazz and other teams projected to be bad, courtesy of Fanduel. The Brooklyn Nets, 19.5 wins. The Bulls, 27.5. I just did this in order of alphabet. And Brooklyn, not Nets. I understand that's N before B. But anyway, the Nets, 19.5 wins. Bulls, 27.5. The Hornets, 29.5. The Pistons, 25.5. The Blazers, 21.5. The Raptors, 30.5. The Spurs, 36.5. Your Utah Jazz, 29.5. And the Wizards, 20.5. That's 9 teams that I think are widely regarded as not being good, not true contenders to make the play-in, or certainly not the playoffs. So let's start with our Jazz. The Jazz have 29.5 projected wins, which I'd personally lean toward the under, though I don't offer this as gambling advice because I work for the NBA and cannot bet on this. I think the Jazz will win fewer than 29 games. That's just my opinion. The main reasons: the Jazz will play in the West, which features 13 teams with more than 36 projected wins, and thus the Jazz will always be playing against quality opposition. Furthermore, the Jazz start playing 21 games, one of which has under 36 projected wins, the Bulls, but that's in Chicago. The Spurs are projected 36.5 wins, therefore over 36, and those are the two that the Jazz I think would be favored in. Or maybe they won't be, which would be the lowest of any other team aside from the Bulls and their 27.5 projected wins that the Jazz play in Chicago early in the season. The Jazz play a few really good teams and a lot of pretty solid ones. Every other team in the opening 21 games, aside from the 36.5 win Spurs and the 27.5 win Bulls, projected to win over 40 games. That means that 18 of the 21 games, the Jazz will be playing a team that probably will be in the play-in. Probably. You don't know that for certain. Maybe 40 is not enough this year. It wasn't enough for the Rockets last year, actually. The Rockets were 41-41 and missed it altogether. Regardless, that's semantics. That means the Jazz will likely be on the fast track to the top of the lottery odds early in the season. Secondly, the Jazz, after that 21-game stretch of brutality, then play all of December on the road, but 2 games, excluding that one in-season tournament game, excuse me. So they play 3 games in December that could be within the Delta Center. We don't know the exact schedule, but that's pretty absurd. That's really hard. You have from December 3rd to the 28th, the Jazz will be playing once inside the Delta Center. And then they play on the 28th, and they go to OKC December 3rd to start that trip. So it's December 1st, actually, the 28th. Now, I expect the Jazz to be in dire straits because of that by game 35 this season. And then by then, they'll know the year is meant for development of the young players and going in on, hey, this guy, we got to figure out if Cody Williams, if Taylor Hendricks, if Walker Kessler, if Keontae George can be the guard of the future. All these things will be answered because there's no pressure to win because you're already playing so many good teams through the first 30 games of the season. The Jazz, I'd be pretty stunned if they have more than 6 or 7 wins through 30 games. I know that sounds crazy, but if you look at the schedule and really think about how good the West is and the necessity of everyone to keep pace, it's a little less crazy than it sounds initially on the initial thesis of the statement of the Jazz will be that bad. Like, I truly believe that. Maybe the Jazz realize, look, this is the chance to go get the All-Star going forward, and let's see what other players we have to build around. I think that could happen after a tumultuous start to the season, which very well could happen considering the amount of good teams the Jazz play early and often. Now let's see where the other teams are projected. Like I said, Nets 19.5. I think the Nets will really be quite awful. They're among the worst teams in the NBA. They're projected to be the very worst. But the East, you play enough bad teams, I think anything's possible. I think the Bulls, who are projected at 27.5, are in a bit of a purgatory of the situation where they're in between something good and in between something bad. I think they're going to be bad, but I don't know if they're going to be as bad as that record would indicate because they still have a few solid players, which makes it harder to tank because Zach LaVine can score, DeMar DeRozan can score. It just makes it harder to be as bad. And that's what it's been the last few years. DeMar DeRozan is someone who has scored a lot of points for a long time. And he's now on the Kings. But Zach LaVine, it keeps you in purgatory. Like when LaVine was hurt, it was DeRozan. Now DeRozan's gone, LaVine's going to score a ton. Vucevic is still there. You can't really do that much with Vucevic not there. Well, I mean, with Vucevic there, who scores you 18 and 10, even if he's horrible on defense, and Zach LaVine, who's going to score you 28 points a game without DeMar DeRozan there. Patrick Williams still there. You hope, if you're a Chicago guy, that Lonzo Ball comes back. That's bold and hopeful, but there's still hope. I think the Bulls 27.5 is probably in the ballpark where they get. I would lean a little bit over there. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're really giving up and they're like, we don't have any hope here. Maybe Buzelis is given the reins early and it's just too hard to win as a rookie. I don't know. He was the 11th pick. Kobe White, who is there, scored 22 a game last year and will have more opportunity with no DeMar DeRozan. And I think you're still in the same predicament. The Raptors, or excuse me, I skipped a few there. The Hornets, I expect to be under their projected win total, but barely, as they have the youth that needs to prove itself and maybe clarify the hierarchy of who is their best player going forward between Brandon Miller and LaMelo Ball. Maybe they coexist and they're great together. The Pistons, I think, are super strange, and they have a weird amalgamation of high picks that don't fit together, and they'll go as Cade Cunningham goes, / how healthy he is. The Pistons were projected 25.5. The Hornets 29.5. I think the Hornets will be about there. I think they'll have more wins than the Jazz, even though the Jazz are projected at 29.5. I think both of them are pretty close. I think the Hornets are pretty close. I think the Jazz will be under that. As for the Pistons, I think the Pistons, who are projected at 25.5, probably hit that on the head and put themselves squarely in top 5 once more. But maybe they've had bad luck other than getting Cade Cunningham at 1. They've been at 5 this year. At 5 took Holland. It doesn't make sense. Cunningham, Duran, Ivy, all these different guys, Thompson. It's just not making a whole lot of sense to my basketball computing mind. So I don't know what they're going to do. I don't expect them to be very good. Last year they started out terribly. Now the Blazers, who I've said erroneously a few times, this time the Portland Trail Blazers on paper might be better than the Utah Jazz, honestly, because they have a lot of talent, but it's a little bit redundant. Scoot Henderson, you want to see what you have there. Shaden Sharp, how good is he? Anthony Simons, what do you have there? He's now no longer a young guy. Even though he is young, he's not young in NBA years. He's been there a long time. Jeremy Grant's still there. You still have DeAndre Ayton. You picked Donovan Clingan. I don't know. I think the Blazers actually might be better than their projection of 21.5, though they've kind of gotten the hang of this tanking thing. I don't know how, but they've figured out ways to be pretty bad with rosters that aren't good enough to win, but they're not bad enough to be as bad as they've been. Now, the Raptors, I think, will be worse than winning 30 games, but I think the Jazz are worse off due to playing in the Western Conference. Just as simple as that. They just play more high-quality teams than the Toronto Raptors do, more times. The Spurs are at 36 games, and I think may end under that. I mean, it's hard to improve that much, but Wembanyama, leaps and bounds, Chris Paul, Harrison Barnes, they improve. But I just don't think that they'll be bad enough to even factor into this conversation. Maybe they'll even get onto the fringe of the play-in berth. I don't think so, just because the rest of the West is that good. Now, the Jazz, there's one more team. It's the Washington Wizards. I think the Wizards might be the worst team in basketball. I think they're that bad. I think the Wizards are horrible. They're projected 20.5 wins. I think they're worse than the Nets. Those are the two worst teams in basketball. And then there's the Jazz, in my opinion. I expect the Jazz to win 21 to 23 games and be top 5 in the lottery, maybe even top 3. That's my projection. I'm very curious, like I said, at the outside of this show, to know what you guys think it'll be. Maybe I'm too low. Maybe Lowry's so good, and he is really good, that we win more games. I just think the level of competition and the way we'll be behind schedule in terms of playing 21 straight games that are really difficult and then going on that brutal road trip. So give me 30-something games into the season, and our record's as bad as I expect it to be. I don't think it's anything you can recover from, nor should you want to recover from it. And there'll be an intentionality of development after that point. That's my take. But we'll talk about who could be on who could be on the roster next year. Should the Jazz put themselves in position to be this bad, that means they get a high pick. That's what it should mean. Lottery can be cruel. It also can be friendly. Who is available on the other side? Cooper Flagg's one name. I got one guy I think might have a higher outcome than Cooper Flagg, and we'll break it down, comparing them both to legends, coming up next. Right after I tell you about Game Time. Have you guys ever been to an MLB game? Because I have, and they're awesome. And it's never been a better time to go than now because of Game Time. The MLB season's heating up, and Game Time's an authorized ticket marketplace of the MLB, which makes getting regular season and playoff tickets even faster and easier. The prices on Game Time actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guaranteed, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. They have great, easy-to-find and buy MLB tickets or for any kind of event in your area. In fact, I'm going to the U.S. Open in New York in a couple weeks, and I used Game Time to buy those tickets and made sure to peruse those views from the seats using the panoramic view in the seat in the app before I bought them. And I can tell you how truly worth it is to know where you'll be sitting, know what's in front of you, how many people, what pole, what stanchion is going to be in front of you. I want the best seat to see the best players in the world. So should you. For whatever you're watching. Maybe it's a concert, but they offer you all the same on Game Time. And they also have this cool feature, the lowest price guarantee. And if they don't, Game Time will then credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, MLB tickets, or whatever you guys are into on Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to Locked On Jazz. And I think there's a player who needs to prove it first that can be better than Cooper Flagg if he hits the max outcome. If both of them hit their maximum outcome, I think this player is better than Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg, 1 through 90th percentile, is probably the better player. But the best pieces, in my opinion, to winning championships right now, the way the NBA is played, with two-way wings, scoring in isolation when it matters, when the game slows down, ability to score in different phases of the game, both from three, slashing, isolation in the mid-range. Those are the wings, the two-way wings who can be go-to scorers, and I'm not entirely sold Cooper Flagg can be your go-to scorer. I even have reservations about Wembanyama. Wembanyama, I think, is all-worldly, otherworldly, in fact, alien. I think he's unbelievable. Can he be the best player on a team? I don't know, because it's hard. You saw it even in college basketball. It's an interesting comparison. Jokic is the guy who can make players better, so he can be the best player, but he doesn't need to have the end of the game shots. In fact, it's Jamal Murray who often does. In college basketball, Zach Edey dominated so much so that at the end of games, they would try to throw the ball into Edey, and they had no one else who could create. Yeah, that's college basketball, but the same recipe applies. It's harder to get the ball and win a game from the interior than score in isolation from the perimeter. So, can Wembanyama be the best player? Can Cooper Flagg elevate his game? Absolutely, to being the best player in this class. Yes. Can he be the best player? To be determined if he's going to win a championship. So that's why I think that Ace Bailey, he's going to Rutgers, second or third, depending on the recruiting outlet or ranking and recruiting outlet in all these classes. So he's not some unknown guy. I think his 100th percentile outcome, meaning that he is the best player he can possibly be, is a better player in terms of being the number one option on an NBA basketball floor than Cooper Flagg at his 100th. Like I said, Cooper Flagg 1 through 90, maybe even 1 through 95 percentile is probably better, because what he's going to do, great, if he maxes himself out. Defensively, he's going to be a terror. He's going to become a good shooter, which I think is still a place he's improving. He's not great, but he's getting better. He's going to be someone who uses his size to create for others. He's going to be someone who can attack the rim and use his elite athleticism. Yes, Cooper Flagg is an elite athlete. He's not a sneaky athlete. He's an elite athlete. He's someone who glides to the rim. He's going to be able to score in a multitude of ways. However, I think his max outcome, and I'm going to compare them to legends. I don't necessarily mean they're identical, but I'm just going to use them as archetypes so you guys can be familiar with these players. I think Cooper Flagg's max outcome is somewhat similar to Scottie Pippen. Scottie Pippen, unbelievable player. He's a Hall of Famer. He was the best Robin ever, perhaps, with Michael Jordan as his Batman. But what I'm saying is, to be the best player on the team, you don't get a Michael Jordan. You have to be the guy. Well, Scottie Pippen was first team All-NBA when he was the guy. Yes, he was. But were those Bulls team all that great? I didn't think so. I mean, I wasn't alive for it, but I've dug through the history books. I've watched it played. And Ace Bailey reminds me more of a Tracy McGrady. And if you ask me, I'd trade Tracy McGrady as the number one option over Scottie Pippen. And now I know these guys aren't exactly those guys. And the likelihood is they're not as good as those guys and never will be. It's possible, but that's just the likelihood. I would have taken Grant Hill over Scottie Pippen, barring injury. Those are two of the biggest what ifs ever. But Ace Bailey has this nuanced ability to score the ball in any facet that he wants. Yes, he's a better athlete, and yes, he plays inferior competition, and no one else on his team's close. And Cooper Flagg plays on Montverde Academy, where everyone's really good. They all are going to D1, high D1 schools. He's playing with other top 10 recruits in the class routinely. And so even when VJ Edgecombe, who's the top 5 recruit, and his number 2 in the nation team plays Montverde, it's not even close. So yes, Cooper Flagg could do more maybe. But what Ace Bailey can do is he can score inside, outside, crazy array of moves, tough shot maker, tough shot taker. I liked that about Brandon Miller. I liked that about Paolo Banchero. I liked that about Jason Tatum. I didn't necessarily like the tough shots they took, but the fact that they had the confidence to take them and then make them enough to where I'm like, wow, that guy can really do that. And he doesn't need to right now, but he can really do that. And it translates right away. Yes, you can point to Banchero shooting poorly from the perimeter, but Banchero through 2 years is an all-star talent. He's a guy that was in consideration to be on this Olympic team. He didn't make it. That's because you took some of the best players in the world to make this USA team. Banchero was highly in consideration by Grant Hill. Now you go back to T-Mac and Grant Hill for that sake of the argument. Those type of guys with the ball in their hands elevated teams that weren't particularly great and scored in multiple ways, had the ball in their hands, and they were regarded as special talents who then, if you supported them properly, especially in today's day and age where that type of player is most prioritized, where you want a guy who can really score the basketball in multitude of ways, who can play 2 ways. Yes, they're not going to be as good of defenders as Cooper Flagg, but they're solid, they're big, they score from 3, they score from the inside. I think if the Jazz were to just say, we want the 100% outcome of some player, it's safer to take Cooper Flagg because he elevates your defense. He's going to elevate your offense. But I'm not all that convinced he can be the best scorer on a team that wins a championship. And that should be the Jazz's aspiration. That should be every team in the NBA's aspiration. It may not be easy in the short term. It's not for the Jazz, but in the long term, that's what they should be thinking about because right now in the short term, they cannot compete. I think that Ace Bailey would complement Lauri Markkanen if at the 1,000th percentile or 100th percentile and hits his absolute peak, he might be better because he'll create such attention and create passing lanes or passes and get Lauri Markkanen shots. As Lauri Markkanen's a great Robin, we've all criticized the possibility of him being a 1. We don't think it's going to happen. The one that I think would elevate the Jazz if you got the 100th percentile, the top end outcome, is Ace Bailey because of the ability he could really score the ball, defend, and pass, all of which Flagg can do great, but the scoring is the most important of those 3. And I think the scoring capacity of Ace Bailey is greater than Cooper Flagg's scoring ability. Now, if you ask me who's number 1 on my board right now, I'm going to tell you Cooper Flagg. I'll probably tell you Cooper Flagg come draft day. But as of right now, and stuff has to be proven by both of them, at Duke for Cooper Flagg and at Rutgers for Ace Bailey. Maybe one of them has a great year and the other one doesn't. It becomes clearer. But right now, I truly believe that Ace Bailey has the ability to score that is rare that Cooper Flagg doesn't even have. He's a more well-rounded player. Think of the Chet Holmgren versus Paolo Banchero debate. Chet Holmgren probably more well-rounded. He's a great defender. He scores well, but Banchero has the ball in his hands and scores and is your superstar right away. Chet Holmgren's complimentary. Both could be great. Maybe Chet could be better on a better team, but right now the guy who's got the better chance of being a superstar is Paolo Banchero. I think this is not an unfounded debate. I just think it's a debate that people probably don't want to entertain because Cooper Flagg has kind of become the chosen one of you want him. And you're probably right. He probably will be number 1. He probably will be the best player. But don't be stunned if Ace Bailey becomes the best scorer in this class. And I think the Jazz need that type of score more than the elevating floor guy of Cooper Flagg. Yeah, he can absolutely elevate the ceiling, and I'd love to be proven wrong, and I'd love the Jazz to get Cooper Flagg. But I don't think this is as a bold of a take or a cry for attention type of take as maybe many will see when they see this title and say, well, Cooper Flagg's the foregone conclusion. Maybe he is, but Ace Bailey might be at the 100th percentile, the guy that elevates the Jazz more. So thank you guys, as always, for listening. Thank you again for making Locked On Jazz your first listen today. And go check out Locked On NBA podcast. I know we toot our horn a lot, but the season never ends in the NBA. But you don't get national expertise like this everywhere else. You get national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for listening. I'm Leif Thulin, and as always, go Jazz.